For 20 years, Dorian Varela ruled Chicago without ever rising from his black titanium wheelchair. Men twice his size lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Doctors from every continent whispered the same verdict, and enemies waited for the day his useless legs would finally turn him into an easy target. Then, on a storm-soaked night, a broke single mother named Maren Ellis was dragged into his lakefront mansion with a blindfold over her eyes and $10,000 waiting on a table. She was not a surgeon. She had no miracle machine, no famous degree, no army of specialists behind her. All she had were hands trained by desperation and a sick 8-year-old son who needed medicine she could no longer afford. Dorian mocked her the moment she touched his ruined spine. But when Maren pressed her thumb into a buried knot of scar tissue, pain shot through the dead half of his body for the first time in 2 decades. Then his toe moved. One tiny twitch. One impossible sign of life. And somewhere in Chicago, a traitor was about to realize the most dangerous man in the city had just found a reason to stand. For 20 years, Dorian Varela had not stood for any man. Yet every powerful man in Chicago had learned to stand when his name was spoken. His wheelchair was matte black titanium, silent as a blade across marble, fitted to his body like both a throne and a punishment. From that chair he ran the Varela Empire with the cold discipline of a judge and the reach of a king. Ships moved when he allowed them to move. Warehouse doors opened when his men gave the word. Politicians, dock foremen, casino owners, and men who smiled too easily in expensive suits all understood one law: Dorian might not walk into a room, but he could still own everything inside it. The world saw power. Dorian felt only the weight of dead legs beneath a wool blanket and the old fire in his spine that never fully burned out. The accident had happened when he was 22. A bomb hidden beneath a parked car outside his father's favorite steakhouse ended his old life in one flash of orange light. His father died before he hit the pavement. Dorian survived by being thrown through a storefront window, his lower spine crushed badly enough that 3 private surgeons could barely look him in the eye when they gave him the verdict. He would live. He would command. He would never walk again. Dorian listened without blinking, then spent 2 decades proving a body could be broken without breaking the man inside it. Doctors came from every continent with theories, machines, injections, operations, and expensive confidence. They scanned his spine cut where others had already cut, apologized in careful language, and left richer than they arrived. By 42, Dorian no longer let specialists touch him. He had accepted the chair not as defeat but as architecture. It held up the myth. It hid the loneliness. 30 miles south, in a narrow apartment above a closed pawn shop in Bridgeport, Maren Ellis measured her life in pill bottles, overdue notices, and the seconds between her son's breaths. Rowan was 8 years old, thin-wristed and bright-eyed, with a sweetness that made strangers lower their voices around him. His lungs had been weak since toddlerhood, then worse after every winter infection, until doctors began using words Maren pretended not to understand in front of him. Degenerative, progressive, severe. Manageable with the right treatment, they said, but manageable was a rich person's word. It meant machines humming all night, air filters that needed replacement, inhalers with prices that changed without warning, and medication that cost more than rent. Maren was a licensed physical therapist, or had been before her divorce left her drowning in court fees and debt. Her ex-husband ruined her credit, delayed support payments, and smiled in mediation as if poverty proved she had failed as a mother. So Maren worked wherever she could. By day, she took legitimate shifts that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. By night, she treated construction workers, aging fighters, dancers with torn tendons, and men who paid cash because they did not want their injuries recorded. The wellness center where she worked after dark sat beneath a flickering sign in the South Loop, smelling of eucalyptus oil, damp towels, and old carpet. She had a reputation among people with no insurance and no options. They said she had hands that could find pain before a patient confessed to it. Maren never called it a gift. Gifts sounded easy. What she had was years of studying anatomy, listening carefully, and noticing what arrogant doctors missed. She could feel where muscle guarded injury, where scar tissue pulled like rope, where nerves lay buried beneath the body's own attempts to protect itself. On a rain-heavy Tuesday evening, Maren was closing the center alone. The last patient had paid in crumpled 20s and left through the back door. She was washing lavender oil from her hands when the front lock clicked. At first, she thought the wind had shifted the door. Then she saw the reflection in the mirror, a tall man in a dark, tailored coat, broad enough to block the hallway, watching her without apology. Maren turned slowly, keeping one wet hand near the metal tray where she kept scissors. "We're closed," she said. The man did not move. Maren Ellis. Her stomach tightened. "You need to leave. My name is Leon Mercer," he said. "I work for someone who needs pain management. Then your someone can call during business hours." He does not call. Leon stepped into the treatment room and placed a thick band of $100 bills on the table. The sound it made was heavier than money should have been. Maren looked at it despite herself. $10,000. Rent, Rowan's medication, a replacement filter, a month of breathing without choosing which bill would bleed first. "One session," Leon said. "If you help him, there will be more." Maren forced herself to look away from the cash. What kind of condition? Paralysis, chronic pain, 20 years. "I'm not a miracle worker." "Good," Leon replied. "He hates those." Something in his calm made her skin go cold. "Why me?" "Because you fixed men the hospitals abandoned. Because you are desperate enough to come and smart enough to understand the rules." Maren's throat dried. "What rules?" Leon glanced toward Rowan's small backpack beside her coat. "You ask no names beyond what you are given. You repeat nothing. If you try to run to police reporters or friends, your son loses protection he does not even know he needs." The room seemed to tilt. "Do not talk about my child." "Then protect him by listening. The car is outside. Bring your tools. You will wear a blindfold." Maren looked at the money again and hated herself for calculating before she could refuse. Rowan had coughed blood last week. The pharmacy had warned her the next refill could not be delayed. The landlord had taped a final notice to their door that morning. Pride had become a luxury. Safety had become a question she could no longer answer. 10 minutes later, Maren sat in the back of a black SUV with a silk blindfold tied over her eyes, her therapy bag clutched in both hands, counting turns to keep panic from swallowing her whole. She told herself, this was one job, one night, one impossible choice made for a child who deserved mourning. But when the blindfold came off inside a mansion that smelled of old wood, rain, and power, Maren saw Dorian Varela for the first time, seated before a fire like a man carved from grief and command, and she understood that some doors did not open for money. Some doors opened because once you stepped through them, the life behind you locked forever. Dorian Varela did not turn from the fire when Maren entered the room. He sat with one hand on the arm of his wheelchair and the other around a glass of amber liquor. Silent guards waited outside the door, the black lake thrashed beyond the windows, and a medical table stood beneath a chandelier. The money in her coat pocket should have felt like rescue. Here it felt like a chain. "This is the woman Dorian asked?" Leon Mercer stood by the door. "Yes." Dorian finally looked at her, taking in her cheap scrubs, worn sneakers, and therapy bag. "You look exhausted." "I am," Maren answered. One corner of his mouth lifted. "Most miracle workers arrive smiling." "I didn't come to sell you a miracle." "Then what are you selling, Miss Ellis?" "Warm oil, positive thinking." The insult landed, but Maren had survived landlords, judges, and doctors who spoke to her as if poverty meant ignorance. She set her bag down. "I charge by the hour. If you want to spend it insulting me, that is your choice. If you want me to examine your back, get on the table." Leon went still. Dorian stared at her, and Maren understood that men had vanished for less. Then he laughed once. You have either courage or no sense of self-preservation. Tonight, I have a child who needs medicine, she replied. That makes the difference hard to measure. Something flickered across his face. He set the glass aside, moved the chair beside the table, locked the wheels, and lifted himself out of it. His upper body was strong from 20 years of carrying what his legs could not. But when his lower half dragged behind him, Maren saw the truth beneath the legend. Dorian Varela was feared by half a city, yet his own body had become the one prison he could never threaten into obedience. He landed face down on the padded table. Do your worst. I cannot feel anything worth discussing. Maren washed her hands and forced herself into the calm rhythm of work. The moment her fingers touched the scars across his lower spine, fear gave way to focus. The tissue was not merely damaged, it was armored. Old surgical trauma had formed a dense cage around the lumbar region. His muscles had learned to protect an injury long after the violence had ended. She traced the edges carefully, mapping heat resistance and the faint tremor of a nervous system still fighting beneath the ruins. How many surgeries? She asked. 7. They worked on the spine. That is where the damage is. Part of it, she said. Dorian's shoulders tensed. Careful. No, you hired me because careful failed. She pressed both thumbs beside the old injury, feeling the rope-hard tissue refuse to give. Your body built a wall here. Maybe the nerves are dead, maybe not. But no signal can pass through something this locked down. Every scan says otherwise. Scans show structure. They don't always show captivity. Maren moved to his left hip and placed her elbow over a knot buried deep beside the scar. This is going to hurt if I am right. I told you. She applied pressure. Dorian's breath broke. A sharp sound tore from him as his hands clamped around the table's edge. Maren froze only long enough to confirm what she had felt. A response, sudden and electric, traveling where sensation was not supposed to exist. What did you do? He demanded. I found something alive. Again. Not like this. If I forced too much too fast, I could inflame everything. He turned his head enough for one dark eye to catch hers. The coldness was gone. In its place burned terror disguised as command. Again. Maren thought of Rowan beside his coughing machine of the pharmacy, warning her the next refill could not be delayed. Of Leon's threat, and of the fact that this man could destroy her if hope became humiliation. Then she thought of the flicker under her hands, small but undeniable. When the body answered, you listened. You will breathe when I tell you, she said. You will stop if I say stop. And if you threaten me while I work, this session ends. Dorian stared as if she had just negotiated with a weapon. You are giving me rules. I am giving your body a chance. A silence passed between them. At last he lowered his head. Work. For the next hour, Maren used pressure and controlled release through his hips and lower back. Dorian endured it with clenched teeth until a curse slipped from him. Twice he ordered her to stop, and twice she did because the tissue needed time. Each pause taught him a new kind of control. He could not command healing. He had to cooperate with it. That realization offended him more than pain. Near the end, Maren found a final adhesion close to the left side of his L5 vertebra. She eased into it, waiting for the muscle to soften. Breathe in, she said. He did. Now let go. I don't know how. Then learn. Dorian exhaled, furious and obedient. Beneath her hands, the tissue shifted. At the foot of the table, his left big toe bent downward a fraction of an inch. No thunder crashed. No music swelled. The room simply stopped. Maren pulled her hands back, heart pounding. Dorian pushed himself up on his elbows and looked over his shoulder. Did it move? His voice was barely human. Maren swallowed. Yes. He stared at his foot, then at her and the Empire. The guns, the mansion, all of it fell away for one naked second. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a grave and hearing someone breathe beneath the dirt. If this is false hope, he said softly, you will regret entering this house. Maren should have lowered her eyes. Instead, she stepped closer. If I am right, you will regret waiting 20 years to let someone hurt you the correct way. For the first time that night, Dorian was not looking at her as a servant, a threat, or a fool. He was looking at her as a possibility. Maren made her decision before fear could take it back. I can try to help you, but I need time, equipment, and no interference. I will not be blindfolded again, and my son's medical bills are covered first. Leon inhaled sharply by the door. Dorian did not look away. You bargain boldly for someone in my house. I bargain like a mother. Slowly, Dorian nodded. Your son will have whatever doctors he needs. You will come twice a week. Leon will protect you. He glanced toward the foot that had betrayed 20 years of certainty. Do not make me believe unless you are prepared to finish what you started. Maren picked up her bag with trembling hands. Then stop calling yourself dead. Outside, rain hammered the glass, but inside the room something colder and older than rain had begun to break. 6 weeks after Maren Ellis first made Dorian Varela's toe move, the impossible had stopped feeling like a miracle and started feeling like work. She no longer arrived at the mansion blindfolded. Leon Mercer still sent a black SUV and checked every street before she stepped outside, but Dorian had kept his word. Rowan's prescriptions were paid before Maren could ask. A pediatric specialist adjusted the boy's filtration machine and left a treatment plan so expensive, Maren cried where her son could not see. For the first time in months, survival did not feel like a door slamming shut. But hope had a price. Every Monday and Thursday night, Maren entered the lakefront mansion and went to war with Dorian's body. She made charts, pain scales, and exercises he hated on sight. Dorian wanted victory, not process. He wanted to stand because he had decided to stand, as if the nerves beneath 2 decades of scar tissue were disobedient soldiers. Maren refused to let him bully himself into permanent damage. Again, he snapped one night, gripping the parallel bars Leon had installed in a private gym. His legs trembled beneath him, thin beside the strength of his shoulders, but no longer completely silent. No, Maren said. You have already done 8 attempts. Then we do 9. Then you collapse, inflame the nerves, and lose 3 days. His jaw tightened. You enjoy denying me. I enjoy results. She stepped closer. You spent 20 years surviving by force. Healing is different. If you attack your own body, it will defend itself from you. That sentence stayed with him. Later, when pain left him pale on the table, he stopped mocking her hands. He learned to breathe through pressure instead of resisting it. By the 4th week, he could tighten his left thigh on command. By the 5th, he felt cold along his right calf. By the 6th, standing between the bars with Maren at his side, Dorian held his own weight for 12 full seconds. When his knees buckled, Leon caught him, but Maren saw his face before he fell. It was not triumph. It was hunger. News of change traveled faster than truth in Chicago. Dorian's routine had not shifted much, but men who lived by watching shadows noticed. Meetings grew shorter. Orders came sharper. Leon disappeared twice a week at the same hour. A civilian woman with tired eyes and a therapy bag had become part of a pattern around the most guarded man in the city. In a back room behind a polished import office, Rafael Costa listened to his informants and smiled without warmth. For years, he had built his ambitions around Dorian's chair. The Varela Empire was powerful, but every empire had a crack, and Rafael believed Dorian's crack was obvious. A king who could not stand would eventually be replaced by one who could. Find the woman, Rafael said. If she is treating him, he is either dying or desperate. Either one is useful. The warning reached no one in time. That Thursday evening, Maren stopped at the pharmacy after a double shift, her shoulders aching and her mind full of numbers. Rowan needed 1 refill tonight, another by Tuesday, and the new mask for his machine before the weekend. Dorian's money had softened the panic, but years of fear did not vanish just because a bill was paid. She still counted. She still checked receipts. She still walked home with keys threaded between her fingers. The rain had ended, leaving the alley behind her building slick under a broken security light. She heard the van too late. One moment she was reaching for the side door. The next, a hand clamped over her mouth and an arm locked around her ribs. Her pharmacy bag hit the pavement, orange bottles scattering across dirty water. Maren drove her heel down hard and twisted, but another man caught her wrist. They dragged her into the alley where 3 men surrounded her. One held a knife low, not theatrical, not shaking. "You spend a lot of time up north," he said. "Fancy house, fancy guards. What does Varela want with a massage girl?" Maren forced air into her lungs. "I don't know who you mean." The man smiled and touched the flat of the blade to her cheek. "Rafael Costa wants to know if Dorian is getting worse. Is the old cripple finally rotting from the inside?" "I'm a physical therapist. I treat pain, that's all." "Then maybe you can treat your boy when his machine stops working." The world went silent. "What did you say, Rowan, right? 8 years old. Bad lungs. Kids like that need electricity, clean air, careful routines." He leaned closer. "Accidents happen." Something inside Maren changed. Threatening her had frightened her. Threatening Rowan removed fear and left something harder. She slammed her head forward into the man's nose. He cursed, stumbling back, and she ran 2 steps before another caught her hair and yanked her down. Then headlights exploded at the mouth of the alley. A black SUV mounted the curb. Leon stepped out before the vehicle fully stopped. He did not shout. One man dropped his knife when Leon fired into the brick beside his hand. Another went down under a guard's tackle. The third fled over a fence, leaving Maren on her knees among spilled medication and rainwater. Leon reached her and placed his coat around her shoulders.
"They know about Rowan,"
she choked. Leon's expression hardened. He took out his phone. "Boss, Costa's men found her. They threatened the boy." He listened, then said, "Understood." Maren shook her head. "No, I'm going home. Rowan is alone." "We are going to get him," Leon said. "You will pack 1 bag, nothing more." "My son is not part of his world." He became part of it the moment Costa learned his name. Within an hour, Maren sat in the back of the SUV with Rowan asleep against her lap. His fingers curled around the strap of his oxygen bag. Her apartment door had been left locked behind them, dishes still in the sink, a life abandoned in 10 minutes, because danger had learned the address. When the iron gates of the Varela estate opened, Maren felt no relief, only the terrible knowledge that she had solved one problem by entering a larger one. Dorian waited in the library upright beside his wheelchair, both hands clenched around a silver-handled cane. His legs shook violently, but he remained standing. His eyes moved from Rowan's sleeping face to the bruise forming along Maren's cheek. "They touched you," he said. Maren held her son closer. "They threatened him." Dorian took 1 uneven step forward, pain cutting across his face before he buried it. Then Costa made his first mistake. "I only wanted to pay for medicine," Maren whispered. "I didn't want a war." Dorian stopped in front of her, taller than she had imagined, more human and more dangerous at once. "You were fighting a war long before you met me," he said. "You were just fighting it alone." Maren looked at the cane, the trembling legs, the man who had dragged himself back from impossibility because her hands had shown him a door. For the first time, she understood that helping Dorian stand might save Rowan, but it might also make her the center of a conflict powerful men were willing to kill for. The Varela estate changed overnight from a private fortress into a strange, guarded sanctuary. Maren woke the next morning in a guest room larger than her entire apartment, with Rowan sleeping beside her beneath a blanket so soft he had rubbed the edge against his cheek before drifting off. For a few seconds before memory returned, she thought they were safe. Then she saw the guard outside the window, the camera in the corner of the hallway, and Leon Mercer standing beyond the half-open door like a man who had never once allowed exhaustion to show on his face. By breakfast, Dorian had already moved faster than fear could. 3 pediatric specialists arrived before noon. A new air filtration system was installed in the East Wing by evening. Rowan's medications were organized in a glass cabinet with labels Maren had not written, and every unpaid bill she had carried like stones in her chest was quietly settled. It should have felt like mercy. Instead, it frightened her. Poverty had taught Maren how to understand suffering. Dorian's power taught her something harder, that rescue could arrive with locks, armed men, and debts too large to name. When she found him that afternoon in the private gym, he was sitting in his wheelchair before the parallel bars, staring at them as if they had insulted him. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you." "I slept." "No, you closed your eyes in a room with your hand on your son's back and listened for his breathing." Maren looked away because he was right. Dorian rolled closer to the bars. "He is safe here. Safe because men with guns say so. Safe because I say so. That is exactly what scares me." He turned toward her, and for once he did not answer quickly. The old Dorian would have used command as a wall. This new version, the one created by pain and the tiny betrayal of a moving toe, seemed to understand that not every wound could be intimidated into silence. "I know," he said at last. "I know what this house looks like to you. Do you?" Maren stepped into the gym, her voice lower but sharper. "You see guards and strategy. I see my son sleeping under a roof because men threaten to kill him. I see myself depending on a man the whole city is afraid to name. I see a life I cannot walk away from because danger followed me home." Dorian's hands tightened on the wheels of his chair. "Costa did that, not me, but your world gave him the reason." The sentence hit harder than she expected. She saw it land in his face not as anger but as recognition. For 20 years, Dorian had treated consequences as currency paid by other people. Warehouses burned, rivals disappeared, men betrayed and were replaced. He had never been innocent, and Maren was not foolish enough to pretend otherwise. Yet Rowan's small cough from the hallway cut through the silence like a plea. Dorian looked toward the sound, and something in him softened before he could hide it. "Then I will change the terms of the world," he said. Maren almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because only Dorian Varela could make repentance sound like a business acquisition. "You can't solve everything by giving orders." "No," he replied, reaching for the bars, "but I can start by standing for something other than fear." The session that followed was different. Dorian did not demand more than his body could give, though every part of him wanted to. He listened when Maren told him to shift his weight. He breathed when pain flashed white through his hips. He stopped when she said stop. It was the first time he treated healing not as conquest, but as partnership. Maren noticed. Leon noticed too, though he said nothing from the doorway. For 2 hours, Dorian worked through controlled movements, small transfers of weight, and one slow, trembling attempt to lift his right foot. It barely cleared the mat. Still, it was more than the world believed possible. When he collapsed back into the wheelchair, sweat darkening his shirt and frustration shadowing his face, Maren knelt in front of him and placed a towel in his hands. That was progress. It looked pathetic. It looked like a man learning something he was told he would never do again. His eyes met hers. "Do you pity me?" "No." The answer came so quickly it startled them both. "I pity the boy you were when they told you a verdict and called it truth. I pity the man who had to become terrifying because nobody could bear to see him broken. But you, no. You are difficult, arrogant, reckless, and alive." A quiet breath left him, almost a laugh, almost pain. "You make survival sound insulting. Sometimes it is." From that day, the balance between them began to shift. Dorian still ruled his house with precision, but he no longer used coldness against Maren. He asked about Rowan's treatments. He listened when she explained the boy's triggers. He ordered the kitchen to remove flowers from the east wing after learning the scent irritated Rowan's lungs, then pretended it was a security measure because admitting tenderness clearly irritated him more. Rowan, who had every child's dangerous instinct for finding the lonely person in a room, began leaving drawings near Dorian's study door. Crooked ships, a black chair with wheels, a man with a cane standing beside a huge dog that did not exist. Dorian kept each drawing in the top drawer of his desk. Maren discovered them by accident and said nothing, but that night when she massaged the scar tissue along his spine, her hands were gentler than usual. Outside the estate, the war with Rafael Costa cooled only on the surface. Dorian's warehouses were reinforced, routes changed, informants questioned. Nolan Varela appeared at dinners with a smile too polished to trust, complaining that the household had become distracted by charity cases. Dorian let him speak. He had begun to suspect betrayal, and suspicion made him patient, but patience did not protect the heart. One evening after Rowan fell asleep without coughing for the third night in a row, Maren found Dorian alone in the conservatory, his wheelchair facing the dark lake. "He ran today," she said softly. "Only across the room, but he ran." Dorian closed his eyes as if absorbing the words physically. "Good. You gave him that. You gave me this." He lifted one hand from the wheel and flexed his thigh beneath the blanket. A curse for a curse. Maren stepped beside him. "It was never a curse. It was damage. Damage can become a curse if everyone is afraid to touch it." She sat on the bench near him, and for a long while neither spoke. The mansion hummed around them, alive with guards and secrets, but the space between them felt almost peaceful. "I don't know how to forgive what your world has done to mine," she admitted. "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" Dorian looked at her, and the ruthless certainty that had once defined him was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous: honesty. For the chance to make sure it never touches you again. For the chance to become a man your son does not have to fear. Maren's anger did not vanish. Fear did not vanish either. But something inside her loosened. Reconciliation, she realized, was not forgetting the wound. It was deciding whether the person who caused pain was willing to bleed while changing. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Dorian turned his palm upward and held on carefully, as if strength had finally taught him restraint. The peace inside the Varela estate lasted exactly 11 days before the house learned what betrayal sounded like. It came first as silence, the power dying in every corridor at 2 a.m., the soft hum of Rowan's medical filters cutting off the security monitors going black, the sudden absence of all the things Maren had begun to mistake for safety. She woke before the alarm because mothers of sick children never truly sleep. Rowan stirred beside her, confused, his small hand searching for hers in the dark. Then the emergency lights flashed red, and Leon Mercer's voice came through the wall speaker, calm but sharp. "Basement! Now!" Maren did not ask questions. She wrapped Rowan in a robe, grabbed his portable oxygen bag, and ran barefoot down the service stairs, while guards moved through the hallway with weapons raised. Somewhere above them, glass shattered. The safe room door sealed behind her with a heavy metallic thud. And for the first time since she had entered Dorian's world, Maren understood that protection was not the absence of danger. It was the decision to stand between danger and the people you loved. Upstairs, Dorian sat alone in his study with his wheelchair positioned in the center of the room like a deliberate lie. His cane rested across his lap. Every muscle below his waist trembled from weeks of brutal therapy, but his eyes were steady. He had known Nolan would move soon. The shipping leaks, the altered patrol schedules, the way his cousin's eyes kept sliding toward Maren whenever he thought no one noticed. Each piece had formed a picture Dorian had not wanted, but could no longer deny. Blood did not make a man family. Loyalty did. Nolan entered with a gun in his hand, and Rafael Costa's men behind him, rainwater dripping from their coats onto the marble floor. Still sitting on your throne, Nolan sneered, though his voice shook with triumph. "You should have handed over the woman when you had the chance." Dorian looked at him with a sadness so cold it resembled mercy. "You sold your name for a smaller chair." Nolan raised the gun. "Your time is over." Dorian moved before the sentence finished. He drove the cane into the floor, pushed with both arms, and rose. Not smoothly, not gracefully, but fully. The room froze. Nolan's face emptied of color. The men behind him hesitated, because the legend they had come to kill had just stepped out of his own myth. Pain tore through Dorian's legs like fire over wire, but he welcomed it. Pain meant signal. Pain meant life. He swung the steel-cord cane into Nolan's wrist, sending the gun spinning across the floor, then struck one of Raphael's men hard enough to drop him before the others understood that the wheelchair had never been weakness. It had been camouflage. By the time Leon and the loyal guards pushed through the side entrance, the study was wrecked. 2 invaders were disarmed, 1 was unconscious, and Nolan lay bleeding on the carpet, staring up at the cousin he had underestimated for 20 years. "Why?" Dorian asked him, breathing hard, both hands white around the cane. Nolan spat blood. "Because men laughed at us. Because they looked at you and saw a cripple wearing a crown." Dorian lowered his gaze. "No, they looked at me and saw what you feared becoming trapped, dismissed, still stronger than you." The truth ended Nolan's courage. He named Raphael the payments, the false reports, the planned testimony to the commission. By dawn, every secret had been dragged into the light. Raphael had not merely attacked Dorian's business, he had targeted Maren, threatened Rowan, bought Nolan, and built his coup on the belief that a man in a wheelchair could never rise fast enough to strike back. 3 nights later, beneath a financial tower downtown, the leaders of the old world gathered to decide whether Dorian Varela was finished. Raphael arrived wearing confidence like a tailored suit, telling them Dorian had lost control, that his judgment had been poisoned by a civilian woman, that Chicago needed a stronger hand. Then the steel doors opened. Dorian walked in. Slow, uneven, terrible in his restraint. Every step echoed across the vault, and every man at the table understood that they were not witnessing a recovery. They were witnessing a resurrection. Dorian placed Nolan's confession bank records and security footage before them. Raphael tried to shout over the evidence, but fear made his voice thin. The commission did not forgive lies that endangered profits, treaties, and family lines. By the time Dorian took his seat at the head of the table, Rafael Costa's empire was already collapsing. Dorian could have used that moment to become crueler than ever. Instead, he surprised even Leon. "No more street blood," he said. "No more children used as leverage. No more empires built on the sick, the poor, and the desperate. We move the ports, the logistics, the real estate, and every legal enterprise forward. Anyone who wants the old way can leave tonight." Some men thought it weakness. None were brave enough to say so. 1 year later, the black titanium wheelchair sat covered in a storage room, its polished frame catching dust instead of fear. Dorian still walked with a cane, and some mornings the pain forced him to stop mid-step and breathe until the nerves quieted. But he walked. Rowan's lungs strengthened under treatment and clean coastal air, and his laughter became the sound that filled the house more often than guards' radios. Maren opened a rehabilitation clinic funded by Dorian but owned in her name, a place for patients other doctors had dismissed. She called it the Second Signal. On the first summer evening after its opening, Dorian stood beside her on the terrace while Rowan ran across the lawn with a dog too large for him and a joy too big to measure. "You changed everything," Maren said. Dorian looked at the boy, then at the woman whose hands had found life where the world had declared death. "No," he said softly. "You touched the part of me that was still alive. I only finally chose to stand." Maren slipped her hand into his, and this time neither of them held on out of fear. They held on because family was not the blood that betrayed you, nor the power that protected you. Family was the person who stayed long enough to help you become better than your wounds. And love, Dorian learned, was not a miracle that healed without pain. It was the courage to change step by step until the life waiting beyond the scars became real.